Will the consumers remember the amount that we got basically almost ripped off by all of the GPU retailers during the great GPU crisis that basically, Nvidia and AMD as well kind of were all in the middle of? Now, there are going to be some examples that you guys, I'm sure, will remember that are pretty egregious, and other examples that you may have not heard about. Now, this is all highly relevant now because retailers are desperately trying to get rid of a massive amount of overstock that they have of RTX 3000. Instead of gouging us with terrible bundles and deals like they did before, they're trying to entice us with historically much lower prices and even bundling different things. But is it going to be enough? Do consumers really have that short of a memory that we're not going to remember which retailers really try to rip us off the most? It was definitely a time where it seemed like everybody was taking advantage of the situation. Not only the small sort of scalpers that you would meet on Facebook Marketplace and locally, but then larger retailers, all the way up to Nvidia and AMD themselves. Who knows what they were doing behind the scenes? Everybody took advantage of the GPU prices being high. So let's go over some of the worst examples, and you'll see if you guys agree with me. All right, so let's go over one of the ones that I consider maybe definitely pretty bad, and that's going to be Best Buy. Why do I consider it pretty bad? Well, Best Buy is one of the only places that you could actually buy a Founders Edition GPU. In the beginning, Nvidia would sell it themselves through their website. For whatever reason, it seemed like that really did not work out very well. Maybe it was logistics. Their website just couldn't handle the bots and couldn't handle all of the issues. So pretty soon, the Founders Edition seemed to go exclusively to Best Buy. And why is this so important? During a time when all prices were going up, including third-party AIB prices at all other retailers, we're not even talking about scalper pricing yet, the Founders Edition were the only GPUs that stayed at their original MSRP. That's going to be $399 for a 3060 Ti, 3070 $499, 3080 is going to be $699, the 3080 Ti $1199, and the 3090 $1499. Of course, later on that added the 3090 Ti at $1999, but by that point all the pricing was considerably better. So at first, Best Buy would have drops in the actual stores where people would announce a certain date, usually a few days before, and there would be a huge amount of crowds lined up, and those people would go buy GPUs. A lot of them, it seemed, would go and sell them on the secondhand market just because the Founders Edition were the ones that they seemed to be able to make the most markup at. Take something like a 3070, for example, at $499. A lot of the times it was selling for maybe $1,200 to $1,300 during the peak periods of 2021. Even worse, a 3080, if a scalper bought it at $699, some of them were able to get as much as $2,000 or even a little over for them at certain points. Same with the 3090, $1,499, but scalpers would sell them for as high as $2,600, $2,700, sometimes even reaching $3,000 on sort of the secondhand scalper market. So you can bet that Nvidia and Best Buy caught on to this, fairly quickly. It took them a little bit of time, but quickly enough for a big corporation. And then what did they go ahead and do? Well, they couldn't really raise prices on Founders Edition. They raised prices on absolutely everything else, including third-party AIB models, and by that I mean other brands like Asus, EVGA, MSI, etc. The NVIDIA Founders Edition, specifically for those that don't know, are the ones that are made just by NVIDIA. They have that very specific cooler. You guys will know it as soon as you see it. So Best Buy introduced their Total Tech program, and for one of the online drops, of course they switched over to online because in-person seems to be too much of a hassle with fights and things like that happening. You had to actually sign up for Total Tech before you would even have the privilege to staying in the virtual line to get one of these Founder Edition GPUs. And this Total Tech cost $200. That means that if you wanted to buy a Founders Edition GPU, which at the time was the cheapest, you would have to first pay $200. That $699 3080 is now going to be $899. That $699 3080 now is going to be around $899, which was getting much closer to AIB pricing and scalper pricing. So the Founders Edition were supposed to be unique and stay at their MSRP, but Best Buy found this little loophole that people immediately had a lot of backlash against, because after all, you're basically putting up a paywall of an already difficult to get product, making it even more exclusive. And of course, this didn't stop like the scalpers and people that wanted to get them, because most of them would sign up for that. It didn't make a difference to them if they're buying multiple GPUs. This was a huge huge problem. And then from talking with people that were selling GPUs at the time, Best Buy's anti-bot or the scalper system really wasn't that good. They could easily have many different accounts and things like that if they knew what they were doing, causing a single person to be able to buy multiple of these Founder Edition GPUs, therefore keeping other people out of the loop that maybe were just gamers and just wanted it for, a one-time use instead of getting it to resell or something like that. So that's one of the worst examples, I think, during that time. But of course, there's always going to be a little bit worse as well. Some of the things that Best Buy kind of did that was really not that great. If you guys watch my videos, I pointed out a little loophole that you could get a Founders Edition in stores. A lot of times returns from these online orders that maybe they would catch people trying to buy multiple GPUs. The GPU itself would be canceled and go back to the store. And if you did a little trick on the app and you kind of looked at it, it would say out of stock. But if the GPU showed up at a physical store, that GPU was actually there. And if you went up to an associate and gave them the SKU number, they had the GPU there that they could sell it to you. Now, this was not very transparent at all. A lot of people had trouble getting the GPU like this. I did several videos. Sometimes the store employees wouldn't want to sell them. There were even cases of store employees buying the GPUs themselves. Of course, like we mentioned, those $700 3080s were really worth 2 or 3 times the price. So those employees caught on pretty quickly and they would sell them on the secondhand market. There are multiple confirmed stories that this did happen. It would vary from store to store, of course, but that system was also a huge problem because after all, Best Buy is the only place you could buy the Founders Edition. That's why this is so important. If there were multiple retailers and you can get them anywhere, this really wouldn't matter nearly as much. But NVIDIA made it exclusive to Best Buy. If Best Buy puts up a $200 paywall, that's already a huge problem for an exclusive product. And then if Best Buy makes it not transparent in some of the returns that are technically available in store, giving a lot of employees first dibs on it before consumers even know they're there unless they know that little loophole, that's going to be the second major issue, making it extremely difficult for a regular consumer who's not up on all this, who's not an employee, to be able to get the MSRP Founders Edition, causing them to have to go and buy a much more expensive AIB model, or worse yet, have to go on the secondhand market and maybe even pay that Best Buy employee an exorbitant scalper price in order to get the same GPU they could have gotten for considerably less if Best Buy's system was more transparent. So that's my first example of pretty much a huge major retailer that really didn't have to take advantage that much. With the Totaltech, that was an obvious play that took advantage of consumers, and then having a bad system with the transparency of the returned GPUs that were available in store, that was another big no-no, especially for the very exclusive NVIDIA Founders Edition. If Best Buy is the only place you can buy it, you better make sure it's fair for everybody. That's the big problem. Now, Best Buy had to lower prices on GPUs. NVIDIA is losing a lot of money because nobody is buying it. So now we kind of remember that things like that happen. And then the second example of retailers that took advantage of consumers, that's going to be all of the bundle deals. Specifically, it's going to be Newegg and sort of the Newegg Shuffle. There were other deals and bundles from other smaller retailers as well, such as Ant Online, but Newegg was definitely one of the bigger players in the market, especially for GPUs. And a lot of the GPUs, not only were they AIB models, which were already extremely overpriced to begin with, especially things, Asus Strix, for example. I remember a 3080 Ti being over $2,000, and for a GPU that should have had an MSRP of $1,199, maybe it should have been $1,300, $1,400 for an AIB model like that. So that's another example of just the third-party AIBs really taking advantage of the situation as well. So with the Newegg Shuffle, not only could you not outright even buy an expensive GPU, you had to enter the shuffle for the privilege of being chosen to be ripped off by one of these deals. And it's not like you would just buy the MSRP of a third-party AIB GPU and that's it. You overpaid a little bit. That's not the case. They would bundle a pretty bad motherboard, a lot of Z590 motherboards that nobody wanted because new generations were out. They would bundle terrible power supplies that nobody really wanted, and they would bundle a variety of other things, including CPUs nobody wanted. Basically, all of the products they couldn't sell, by themselves, even in a very hot market where everybody was buying motherboards and CPUs and building building PCs. Nobody wanted to touch these items. So what did the Newegg Shuffle do? You did want a GPU. So not only was that price already expensive, but not to make it seem like they were scalping you, they would have to bundle them with these pretty much useless items that you would even have a hard time selling separately, brand new, like on eBay or on the secondhand market. Nobody wanted these motherboards and these power supplies, but it gave Newegg the chance to really not only sell those things, but sort of justify the very high price. After all, it seemed like everybody was buying these GPUs. They were selling out left and right. So this was definitely a very, very bad example, because I can only imagine how many people got ripped off with parts they really didn't want. Now, other companies did this too. Like I mentioned, Ant Online, they're much smaller, and some of their deals, perhaps the bundles weren't nearly as bad. Generally, you would get like an EVGA power supply with a GPU, and of course, you would also get maybe a keyboard and mouse you didn't really want, but at least it was a little bit better than a janky motherboard or power supply that was really a bad brand or something like that. But still, even their pricing was exorbitantly high, like as high as almost $3,000 for a 3090 with a bundle at one point. And of course, that price recently, I pointed out how it was down to like $1,349 for a 3090 Ti with a 1600 watt power supply and some other, little goodies. So that shows you how much the price has dropped. And I would even watch, depending on how well everything was selling, that price would fluctuate from the high 2000s to mid 2000s to even lower 2000s. So you see how much room they actually had in there. And they were basically just basing the price based on how much they would sell. Now, of course, with all these examples, I mean, it's not wrong for a business to want to make money, but when the difference is so massive and it swings so abruptly in an already difficult market, that's when it kind of turns to taking advantage of the situation and of the consumer. During the GPU cycle, when things are happening, we can understand there were shortages and there were manufacturing issues. A lot did go on, but some of these pricing increases were obviously due to cryptocurrency mining and people buying a massive amount of GPUs. So the companies took advantage of this and raised the price much more than was justifiable. That's the problem here. They went way beyond the limit. And now you've seen how far they've pulled back. I mean, look at that example of the 3090 Ti. It started over $2,000 this very year, and it's as much as $1,000 off. That shows you that people don't want to buy it now, and the companies like Nvidia are blaming lack of gamer demand for why they're losing money in their last quarter, for example. So that's actually pretty funny. They said that gaming demand was huge. That's why they sold a lot. Now they blame the gamers when they're not selling, and they expect gamers to what? Buy the GPUs now so they can release RTX 4000. They always forget to mention cryptocurrency mining and how they can't really distinguish between gaming demand and mining demand. After all, one miner may go in and buy 15 to 20 GPUs because it makes financial sense, especially last year, but a gamer is going to buy one and probably be happy for several years. So a really big lack of transparency here. Of course, it all goes back to AMD and Nvidia at the end of the day, because they can set the rules and put controls on their AIB partners and everything else. They seem to exercise control when it's good for them and really limit certain things. So they can certainly do it in terms of pricing and protecting the consumer more. So we wouldn't have examples of this happening like with Best Buy, like with the Newegg Shuffle. So I think we're all going to remember as we go on and the market isn't as hot as it was before, when you can choose to buy your GPU, maybe you'll think twice and remember a place that actually treated you better rather than try to rip you off at every chance it got by raising prices way beyond what normally should be acceptable even for a business to make money. All right, guys, let me know what you think, and if you have any other examples of really bad sort of ripping off of the consumer, let me know down below. Remember to subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video.